The Whiz Kids had won it, Bobby Thompson had done it, and Yogi read the comics all the while. Rock and roll was being born, marijuana we would scorn. So down on the corner, the national pastime went on trial. We're talking baseball,
The Comfortably Zoned Radio Network proudly presents Genesis with Ian Kahanowitz and Marc Weiss.
My baby dolls, we have returned to another episode of Genesis. As always, I'm your host, Ian Kahanowitz, the co-captain, the co-pilot. Marc Weiss is still in unspeaking mood after his surgery on his back. His vocal cords are still not working, so he won't be here today. But today we have a very interesting show. A brand new book has been recently published. We have the author, Mike Reuther, here today. The book is called Pitching For Sanity, and Mike has a very, very interesting little history. By day, he's a journalist, and in this time, getting a job as anything writing is compelling. He likes to write. He likes to write fiction. He's covered everything from politics, crime, government, healthcare, and sports in his books. We're going to talk to Mike today about what he draws from, mostly his experiences. We're going to get into a little discussion of the Mets and a little bit about Pennsylvania, a little bit about his book, because I don't want to give the book away for you folks. I want you to go out and actually buy the book and read it. If I tell you what the book is on this show, I think Mike will kill me. So welcome to the show, Mike Reuther. How are you? All right, how are you?
Thanks.
Yes, it's Reuther's. It's Reuther's, not Ruthers. That's right. Now let me Reuther. Well, let me ask you this question, Mike. How far into Pennsylvania are you? Are you near Philly or are you like near Pittsburgh?
No, I'm up there in what they call the T. The politicians call the T. You drive up from Harrisburg, and it spreads into the T where all the conservatives live. So I'm up in north central Pennsylvania. I'm not a conservative, by the way, so we'll just get that out of the way first of all.
The politics. But let me ask this. Are you near, what's that town, Bradford?
No, I'm near Williamsport, Pennsylvania. I'm just outside the home of Little League Baseball.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, you're deep into Pennsylvania. The New York border is how far away?
The New York border is, well, what would it be? Got to get across Jersey, don't you? Yeah, it's about 180 miles, to New York City.
Yeah, and then you have northern New York. Because I used to visit.
I'm probably 60, 70 miles from the New York border up north.
Yeah, I split through Pennsylvania and Jersey when I went to Binghamton and Alfred State and doing that whole cross against the grain over there. But Pennsylvania, very big baseball state with the Little League, like you mentioned, the Pittsburgh Pirates, Philadelphia Phillies. How the heck did you become a Mets fan?
I became a Mets fan listening to the old WOR-TV, watching the WOR-TV with Ralph Kiner and Bob Murphy and Lindsey Nelson and his crazy paisley suits that he would wear. And I don't know, I just fell in love with the Mets back in the 70s. I was really a Yankees fan, first of all, because my old man and I would watch the games with Phil Rizzuto on television. But I don't know, I just became a Mets fan after a while. I mean, it's hard to ever pinpoint a reason for liking a team. It could be anything from the team colors to the announcers that do the games, and it just happened. And then, in 1973, they won the National League pennant. I was hooked.
All right, yeah, that was a great year of baseball. Yogi Berra coached the team because Gil Hodges died the year before. I speak to his daughter all the time, Irene Hodges. We're trying to get him into the Hall of Fame. But you remember the 69? You should remember the 69 Mets, probably vaguely, if anything.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I remember the 69 Mets. and I rooted for them in the World Series, and I was surprised when they beat the Orioles in 5 games. The miracle Mets, you know, I wasn't quite a Mets fan yet, though. We weren't getting their telecasts here in Central Pennsylvania at that time, so I just didn't get a following. I didn't start following them at that point.
Well, you know what's interesting?
Stadium until a few years later. But anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
You know what's interesting, because in Pennsylvania you had Harry Callis for the Phillies, and you had the gunner, you know, up in Pennsylvania. Did you get both Pittsburgh and Philadelphia games?
I could only get KDKA out of Pittsburgh, you know, on the radio. They didn't telecast the Pirates games in Central PA at that point.
Wow.
But yeah, we got the Phillies. A lot of Phillies fans around here. Probably more Phillies fans than anything, except maybe the Yankees.
Really, the Yankees are that popular in Central Pennsylvania? Because I'm a Yankees fan, and I live in Red Sox Nation now. You know, I grew up. I grew up, Mike, and this is how, you know, I'm 46, or you're a little older than me. I grew up with WWOR for the Mets before they became Secaucus 9 out of New Jersey, and WPIX 11. I grew up with. So the Mets used to be on at either 1 or 4, depending upon. And the Yankees, they used to shift. Very rarely were the 2 games. So I would go from watching Bill White, whose birthday was yesterday, I think he's something like 84 years old, and Phil Rizzuto, and Frank Mesa. And then you go to Ralph Kiner and Lindsey Nelson and Bob Murphy. And like what we spoke to about before this, I loved Kiner's Corner. Love Kiner's Corner.
I did too. I know. I'm almost embarrassed to admit it because, you know, Ralph would always stumble through those interviews, and you could sometimes see the looks on the ball players' faces, you know, when he would, you know, mispronounce somebody's name or call Gary Carter Gary Cooper or something like that, you know, because that was Ralph. That was part of his personality, you know. He would mess things up and. But you love the guy, and lo and behold, he died, and, you know, everybody talked about what a wonderful man he was, and but I don't know, you know, Ralph was Ralph.
Well, you know what's interesting, because him and Bob Murphy were totally opposite of each other. You know, Ralph is almost like the color commentary that Rizzuto was. But I think with Kiner, when you look back at some of the episodes, if you go to YouTube and you look at Ralph Kiner's Corner, you had a lot of famous people on there. Pete Rose, you know, Lou Brock, you know, Gary Carter, Keith Hernandez before he became a Met. So although, you know, you have these ball players who are looking at Kiner like he's nuts, you have to remember, Kiner won the home run award during the 40s and 50s for something like 6-7 years in a row.
7 years in a row.
You know, and so when... Was it 7?
7 years in a row.
Yeah.
You can look it up, as Casey would say.
Yeah. You know, it's funny, you know, with Casey, a new book's coming out on Casey Stengel. I'm reading it now. Hasn't been published yet by, what's his name, who was the PR relations, Marty Appel. So Marty just sent me the book, and I'm reading it. It's due out March 28th. I'm very fortunate to get the baseball books well before they come out. But what I want to talk about is your inspiration for your new book. You know, I got plenty of haystacks here in Massachusetts. I'm thinking about going out there and, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take off my shirt in the hot summer so that all the girls around here can get sick with my gut hanging out. Let's go to what inspired you for that book.
Well, you know, I love baseball. I mean, I still play baseball in an older guys league, you know, for guys over 40, guys over 30. There's a couple leagues I actually play in. I mean, I've been playing baseball since, you know, Little League. So, I mean, there's that. I love to pitch. The character in this book, this latest book, Pitching For Sanity, he's got you know, he was an old pitcher when he was a kid, but he hasn't done it in a while. He finds a lot of, I don't want to give away the plot, of course, but he finds a lot of relaxation in throwing. And it beckons back to those days when he was the star pitcher on his team. He's got a lot of nervous problems, anxiety, and he's got a drinking problem, and he's trying to kick, and the pitching is a relief for him. You know, he's basically kind of an adrift person. You know, he was a career military guy, and he's not doing too much with his life, and he's just kind of battling these demons, and the pitching into a haystack in his backyard every day, as I said, gives him a sense of normalcy, you might say. Kind of makes him forget some of the things that bother him, and there's all sorts of things that bother him because he's got these anxieties, that obsessive thoughts that he just can't cut loose from. So that's kind of who he's all about, you know. And there's a little bit of me in that character, I should say. So that was a sponsor to write this book.
I was going to ask that question. Now, he liked to pitch, and so getting the pitching and stuff. Now, besides the pitching, and I don't want to go into his demons and stuff, besides the pitching and the love of pitching, did you infuse anything else of yourself in the book regarding the character?
Well, other than the fact that I spent a few years in the Air Force, and this guy, he was a career military guy. And that was his life for 20 years, you know, before he got out and went back to his hometown and tried to pick up the pieces of his life. You know, and I guess I did that, but I wasn't in for 20 years. So.
Right. Well, you know Charles Schultz, he wrote the Peanuts comic strip for 50 years. And, you know, Charlie Brown is him as a kid. And, it's funny because in real life, he was actually that same way as Charlie Brown. In fact, I have all his comic strips, and I think in the late 70s, he published one of these little books for school children, which I still have, and it said, "My anxieties have anxieties." You know, and you see Charlie Brown with the kite in the tree and the cloud hanging over his head. Did you have anxiety during your life, and somehow was able to weave the story into this baseball player?
Oh, sure. Yeah, there's no question about it. You know, then again, a lot of people have anxieties, you know, and I think a lot of people can relate to it in that way. And you bring up Charlie Brown. I think the Charlie Brown character has worked so well because I think we're all Charlie Brown. I mean, we lose more than we win in life. Let's face it.
I think
Tom Brady. Of course, Tom Brady's had his own share of battles.
Of course.
But I stand by that. We all lose more than we win. I mean, and so we can all relate to Charlie Brown.
I think my wife, I'm married almost 19 years. I think my wife would be closest to Lucy. She has a psychiatrist booth and the big mouth, and she just adds to the anxieties, you know what I mean? It's like a pitcher, you know, it's like, you know, you say, well, there's a Charlie Brown sense, and, you know, you look at Mariano Rivera and the kind of coolness he had, even when he lost. Well, I don't know if he lost the World Series against Arizona or Jeter was playing too much in, but to be that kind of cool, he has to have anxiety somewhere else because he was just rock solid on the mound there.
Oh, no question about it.
I
don't know the early life of Mariano Rivera, but you know, I'm sure he had his struggles. You know, trying to be a pitcher, but you know, it's interesting, isn't it? The way all of us, we all battle through things, you know, to try to come out the other side the way we want to.
And you know what's funny? Mike? I speak to Fritz Peterson. Remember him on the Yankees? And I speak to him by phone. I want to meet him this year, finally. He's in all my groups. He was telling me, back in the 60s when pitchers used to pitch 280 innings a year, their arms used to fall. He used to have diarrhea right before he was getting ready to pitch. He was so nervous. I mean, and, you're talking about a 20-game winner. Him and Mel Stoudemire were, you could put those two up against anyone in the American League at the time, I think, even the Orioles pitching staff. But he was nervous because he knew he had to perform. He knew kids were watching him. He knew that his control had to be on that day. And so he thought of all these things and got nervous.
Yeah, that's true. And of course, there's the other side of that the nervousness, the adrenaline can fuel you onto greater things than you thought you were capable of doing.
Well, you know what's odd? Let me tell you what's odd. Nolan Ryan. The guy walked so many batters in a season. People don't know this. Well, he has 5,000 strikeouts and stuff. But he was far from having a tip-top control. His longevity was in his fastball and his determination as a competitor. I think the fight with Robin Ventura in his 40s shows the kind of competitive nature he had. But I'm trying to think, how many I don't even know if he won the Cy Young Award, Nolan Ryan, if memory serves me correct.
I don't know either.
I don't think he did. I don't think he did. But again, he was on 4 different teams, I think. The Mets, which again he won the World Series in '69, the Angels, the Astros, and finally the Texas Rangers. He's from Texas. Let me ask you this. You're a journalist. When did you begin writing? Or begin the passion of writing?
I didn't start right. Well, as I mentioned before, I was in the military for 4 years, and then I went to college when I was 22, and I really didn't start right until after I got out of college, and I worked in radio briefly, and I got a job on a newspaper. By then I was 30. I was a little late getting started in any kind of a career. I tried some different things after college, and I did the graduate school thing, and so I didn't really start writing seriously fiction, trying to write books until I was 30 years old. And after that, I went through the usual. I went through the usual route of trying to get published and, getting my manuscripts mailed back to me. This was in the days before self-publishing when you were really up against it if you wanted to see your name in print, see your books on shelves. So I just wrote for years and years, before I actually got published. I mean, if it hadn't been for e-publishing, who knows? We probably wouldn't be having this conversation. It was 20-some years before I actually published anything. And like I said, e-publishing has revolutionized the whole publishing industry. So that's pretty much my story in a nutshell as far as writing. Of course, I've been employed pretty much the last 25 years in newspaper work. So the writing fiction, the writing books has always been in my spare time.
Yeah, have you heard of Stephen Hunter?
Stephen Hunter.
He writes a bunch of novels, thriller novels, cop novels and stuff. He's on the paper down in Baltimore. He's published about 20-something books. But like you, he's a journalist, and when he has, if you want to call it free time, he writes novels. Now, let me ask you this. Like your novels and like the books you wrote, your how-to books, you put your experiences in it, as I could see. Why don't you share some of that with the folks at home?
Well, several of my books have some baseball themes, which we've talked about up to this point, the passion I have for baseball, playing it, watching it, it's just ingrained in me. You can understand that, I think, because you're a baseball nut.
I am. I'm crazy.
All this stuff you've screwed out to me. Of course, growing up in Brooklyn, you probably can't help it. You get handed down those Brooklyn Dodgers stories.
We do.
But several of my books have the baseball theme in it one way or the other. The latest book, there's baseball in it, but I wouldn't consider it a baseball story like some of these other ones. It's more about an anxiety-driven man trying to find his way through life. I wrote a few books on writing. I think I have something to say about writing. I'm a journalist and, banging out fiction, for these years. I did write a book also called Gambling Lives, which was completely different from anything else I ever wrote, about a guy who actually is a journalist, and, he has some different escapades in Atlantic City, and, he gets shot at by the local mob, and that's kind of a thriller crime book. I wrote another book with a baseball background, Return to Dead City, which was a mystery kind of. That was actually my first book. I kind of wrote that with the idea that, maybe this is a good market to try and tap, this mystery thriller market. So I went that route for a while, and, that was fun to write and everything. I don't rule out the fact that I might try to write a few other mysteries down the line at some point. They're fun to write, and there's definitely a market out there for them. But I try to write what I just, what's close to my heart. Baseball and books about people, character-driven stories. That's really what I like to write mostly about. It's what I identify with. A lot of the books I've read over the years, are about people. I think the book that really got me started into reading was, developed my passion for reading was Catcher in the Rye, and I don't know, it sounds like a cliche because I know a lot of people identify with that book. But when I was a teenager, I read that, and I thought, wow, if there are books like this out there that I can identify with and enjoy, I got to find some other books to read. And, that led to, I went through a Hemingway period, and I read Thomas Wolfe, Time in the River, and The Homeward Angel, and not necessarily books, that were plot-driven, but about, people and their innermost thoughts and, what they were going through and how they felt about things. And so that's the way it developed for me as a reader, which eventually led to me wanting to write and see if I could get down on paper some of these things that were going through my head as well.
Because you've got a lot of books within the last, say, 5 to 6 years. So like a book, probably if you average out every 7 months, you publish a new book if I'm on mathematically. But here's two that seem out of order and from the baseball and the characters. We have The Passion of Youth, A Quest for the Perfect Life, and we have The Dude Who Wanted That, Lofty Dreams, Lousy Jobs. Both of those books can probably atone for 90% of the population here.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So, go ahead. I'm sorry for interrupting you, Mike.
Well, I'm not sure what the question was.
Well, the question is, the passion of youth. When you're young, you dream big, and then you dream it, and like Cat Stevens says, in that song "Father and Son," when you grow up, you're still going to be here, but your dreams may not.
Right.
There's going to be a lot of thinking that happened to me as well. You know, there was a lot of things. So I identify with both meanings of the book because you're describing a part of me, which if I go back and look at my 20-year-old self and see how idealistic I was, I did go through law school. I did get 3 masters after law school. I did climb the corporate ladder. I did what society told me to do. And at 46, I'm running baseball sites, taking cases part-time, and living a much different life than the one I dreamed of.
Yeah,
Not to mention twin boys thrown in there. So, you know.
right. So, in a way, you're following a passion, right? I mean, not to delve too deep into your psyche, but you're kind of doing now what you want to do instead of what you think you were supposed to do as a kid growing up back there in Brooklyn, where you were taught to study hard and not that there's anything wrong with that, and work hard and develop a career for yourself.
That's right.
Which is fine for a lot of people, but it doesn't always make us happy, does it?
That's right. Well, let me ask you this, because this is important. And I've been writing for about, 25, 30 years, maybe even more, 35. I won an award in the public schools for creative writing as a young kid at 12 years old. When I went to law school and graduate school for taxes and accounting, you're decent with the numbers, but your writing is your bread and butter. My thing is this: your how-to books, I think, are very important. Number one, freelance writing for beginners, how to make money in this, which is, to me, very competitive. Even though it's easier to publish, it's probably harder to make money as well. Let's elaborate on that.
Yeah, there's no question about it. There's a lot of people out there that want to make money writing, but you find out pretty early on that a lot of people aren't willing to pay you for your writing. And then, of course, you fall into the trap of writing on the cheap. And that just continues the whole cycle. Well, if these guys are willing to write for $5 an article, we'll just pay them $5 an article.
Well, yeah, that happens. That happens to me.
Yeah, if you get on these sites, writers for hire and so forth, you'll find all sorts of opportunities where you can write for for a pittance, and there's always people out there willing to write for a pittance, and then writing's not easy. I mean, you gotta sit yourself in that chair and and do it, and that's the hardest thing about it all.
Well, you know what? I mean, your books fall into a pattern. If I was a detective and I was streamlining your catalog of books, well, think of these 2 books right here. It sounds like a frustrating process. How to write a book without going crazy, creative writing, self-publishing, and then listen to this. Your other book, write that darn book already. It's like, okay, let's describe what these 2 meanings have.
How to write a book without going crazy. Yeah, that's that's what people do that want to write. They do drive themselves crazy, thinking how they're going to get started out, what they're going to write about, how they're going to keep that momentum going. And I try to keep it simple as much as I can. Not that I don't run into some of these stumbling blocks as well, but it's first getting yourself in that chair and start to write, and then not allowing some of these things that come up to stop you. Well, what if I write myself into a corner? What if I get writer's block? What if I suddenly just decide I don't feel like doing it someday? Well, I think you just got to keep writing. You're going to write. You're going to write some things that you put in a book that, you're going to throw out later. So you got to tell yourself you can't worry about some of these things that are going to come up. It's kind of like life itself, Every day isn't smooth. Every day isn't, a walk in the park. You just got to keep doing it, push through, and magic happens some days, you know. So there's days when you sit down here at the word processor and everything just flies, you know. You lose track of time, and the next thing you know, you've been sitting here for 3 hours, and you put thousands of words down on paper. You know, it just happens. You know, I don't sit and wait for the muse to strike me. I just think you have to just go to it and keep writing.
And, you know, I believe the same thing. You know, I believe, now, like we mentioned before the show, everybody's style is different. Everyone, pretty much like a poet or a chef or a rock star, the way they perform their art is their own, you know, self-imposed discovery. Do you find there's any difference between, you know, the inspiration or the way to write, fiction versus nonfiction?
Yeah, well, there's some subtle differences. When you write nonfiction, you pretty much have a roadmap in your head about what you want to say, what advice you want to give out. With fiction, on the other hand, at least for me, and this isn't the way it is for everybody, because some people have that strict roadmap in their head as well as what kind of a story they want to tell. But I'll tell you, I don't do a lot of outlining for my novels. You know, I have an idea and I go for it, and I kind of just let the writing take me where it does. I have outlined before for some of my books, some of my fiction books, and you know, that worked out pretty well too. But I find that more times than not, I deviate, you know, from exactly how I thought I was going to go on this journey, if you will, of my story. So yeah, I mean, if you look at some of the books I wrote on writing, I mean, they're short books. I mean, 30 pages, if you will. Some of them are a little longer. Like Write the Dark Book, that was a longer book on writing. But I had an idea what I wanted to say in those books, and there was more of an outline process. But for the most part, I kind of go where my creative juices take me, if that makes any sense to you.
Well, it is, and you're right. You know, writing is a journey, because when I, like you, when I start writing something or I outline something, there's always a diversion, because you always find something new on the way to your, you know, through your journey, like taking a ride in the car, seeing the scenery, and you notice something and you have to edit it or take it out, depending upon, you know, where the moment hits you. My thing is this, Mike. When people submit to writing and say they want to get published and stuff, do you use a proposal when you're going to get the stuff published?
Well, my stuff is self-published now. I mean,
right.
I haven't even bothered with traditional publishing for years now. I found that too long a process. I was always banging my head against a wall trying to enter those, you know, impenetrable walls of traditional publishing. So I don't have any need to draw up a proposal any longer.
And, you know, what makes a freelance writer like yourself just as readable as, say, a Tom Wolfe or a Ernest Hemingway in modern times like today?
I wouldn't put myself up against this.
No, you're still a publisher, right? Do you have an editor and stuff, or whatever you put on paper just goes right out into publishing?
Oh, sure. Yeah, you know, I'll run it past somebody. I don't have professional editors, but, you know, I run things past, you know, some of the people, some of my colleagues. But yeah, to put myself up against some of those guys, you know. Tom Wolfe. And by the way, I read a number of Tom Wolfe's books over the years, and you know, he did some very revolutionary things.
Well, yeah.
Some of his writing.
Well, I think who wrote Catches in the Rye? J.P. Salinger.
Yeah, J.D.
Hey, that was revolutionary for the 1950s.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah. I think
the book that holds up.
It holds up over 60 years. I think he stopped writing after a while. I think Salinger.
Oh yeah. He became a recluse, and everybody wondered if he was still writing. Yeah, he holed up in New Hampshire, and you know, in a small town, and nobody heard from him. But and he had kind of an odd life, and he did some things we can't really talk about on the air, I guess. But
yeah. You see what happens? He put so much effort into editing and going crazy writing the book. He actually did go crazy, and you know, almost like Howard Hughes. He ends up spending the rest of his life in some rundown movie theater. You know, growing his hair long, having pictures all around. You know, it's that. I think it's part of the genius. You get a masterpiece out there, and you go nuts afterwards. Just from. Well, it's true. You know, writer's block is a terrible thing, especially if you have a deadline. If you don't have a deadline, it's still because, you know, the anticipation of trying to get from point A to point B, for me, is fulfilling when it comes to the end, but sometimes it's just downright frustrating, and it'll cloud your personal life because you're thinking about the damn thing in your head.
That's right. I think that's another reason people don't write. They think they're going to go crazy.
Let me tell you.
There's too much information out there about, you know, writers who become drunks and drug addicts and, you know, suicidal and so forth, you know. But, you know, I don't know if there really is any kind of, you know, I don't know if writers really have the market on craziness. And
well, you got Edgar Allan Poe. He was absolutely, he became a drunk. He died in Baltimore on his 40th birthday. Agatha Christie, Virginia Woolf, you know, all these, you know, get all these people that are out there writing and stuff. But you know, I like your style though, Mike. You know, you like, just get it on paper. And get it, you know, just throw it out a first draft. But you see, me being a lawyer, we spoke before, I'd end up spending the next 2 years editing the damn stuff. You know?
Yeah, and you can do that. I mean, that's fine. It's not my style. Naturally you don't put the first draft out there. Like they say Jack Kerouac put his first draft out there on the road, and it's considered a masterpiece. But you know, you got to go back and you got to have it polished and edited and so forth. As far as I'm concerned, I mean, unless you're this incredible genius who can put out a first draft without any mistakes, without any crazy meanderings that don't have anything to do with the story. Not that there's anything wrong with crazy meanderings, you know.
No.
That's part of the creative process, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I know. Well, let me ask you this, Mike. You and I grew up at an age well before the personal computer at home. You know, that started happening in the 80s and 90s. Do you find yourself, like you mentioned earlier, the word processor? Now, a lot of people don't even know what the hell a word processor is, you know? But do you sit down at your computer, your laptop, or are you more comfortable getting your ideas down by pen?
Well, I used to write everything in longhand as a first draft. I don't do that any longer. For one thing, I find I have a hard time deciphering what I scribbled down in that first draft. So I do everything on a computer now. I find it easier for myself. You know, there is a school of thought that the best way to get that first draft down is write everything down in longhand as fast as you can. but you got to get it onto the computer then. And I found myself getting away from that totally. I even take notes, as when I'm interviewing somebody, when I'm doing an article or something on the computer. It's hard for me to read my own writing because I'm really a horrible writer with my penmanship.
Oh, my handwriting's like chicken scratch. People say to me, well, you should have been a doctor instead of a lawyer. I say, I am a doctor. I got my PhD. Let me ask you this. Yeah, it's true. Let me ask you this, Mike. When it comes down to the environment you grew up with and the geographic zone you live in now, how did Pennsylvania influence your writing?
Well, that's a good question. It's in a lot of my books. The Pennsylvania, the small town, the rural environment, I know you can't really control where you grow up or you can control where you live, but I guess that it's all in the books, I wrote a book, Baseball Dreams, Fishing Magic, that's about a guy who, played baseball and got cut loose and came back to his hometown and discovered fishing and decided to become a fishing guide and then circled around, the great circle life and went back to baseball and gave it a second try and lived out his life in this little town trying to find his little piece of happiness, just like this guy in this recent book, Pitching for Sanity. So, yeah, all my characters are trying to find their own little piece of nirvana, in their own environments where they grew up, where they feel comfortable, just like myself, I've been pretty much a central Pennsylvania guy most of, my whole life, except for the military and some time I spent out near Pittsburgh. So, what you know, right? What you know, right?
That's the thing, Pennsylvania. I've always lived in New York City for the first 23 years of my life. The last 23 has been up here in New England. But last year, it was my first vacation in 10 years, as I told you. I went through a string of surgeries, and before the one in November, I promised the kids to take them to Hershey Park in Pennsylvania. And, you got the Amish country around there. And I told the kids, I said, the last time I went to Hershey, Pennsylvania, to the park and to the city was back in 2003. And what I remember about it is just rows and rows of cornfields. And it's almost like the Midwest parts of Pennsylvania when you get right down to it.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's most of what Pennsylvania is.
Let me tell you something. Pennsylvania's hot as hell during the summer. There's like this aura of sweltering heat that you say to yourself when you visit the Gettysburg and the areas around it. The smell of the battlefield, with all the bugs buzzing around and, after Pickett's charge and stuff like that, must have been horrendous in the hot summers of Pennsylvania. Humid and the air just hangs.
Yeah, it's kind of like Florida in July and August here.
It is. Something? It really is. And when I visited Florida about 15 years ago, I said I'm never going back. I never did go back. I'm more of a cold. I'm more of a cold-natured guy up in Maine and Canada, but I probably would like Pittsburgh a little bit more in the winters. The movie Groundhog Day was in a small town outside Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Puxatawny, Phil, right? He's coming up in a few days. Weird. The Keystone State. Where the hell did they come up with the Keystone State?
Where did they come up with the Keystone State? Because
I have no idea.
We're surrounded by so many states, and we're the keystone that keeps it all together, I guess.
You know, I mean, well, think of it. Think of your inspiration besides small town, okay? You got two big cities. If you want to throw in Scranton and a couple of other places, Harrisburg, which is your capital and stuff like that, the inspiration to write is great in Pennsylvania. You got Quakers who migrated to Pennsylvania. You had William Penn, who I think was the head Quaker at the time. You have a rich history in sports. You know, the Penguins, the 76ers, the whole Independence Hall thing in Philadelphia. You know, Pennsylvania did, which is why I brought in the discussion around your environment, because Pennsylvania is just as historic as say, Massachusetts is and Boston is, and it's that important to American history. And when you give us stories like baseball and fishing in streams, it's part of Americana when you come to think of it, Mike.
No, there's no question about it. Baseball is that. You know, you could wax poetic about baseball and what it means to America. I think Ken Burns already did that, along with a lot of other people. But
it's true.
Baseball has just been so much a part of my life since I was standing in the backyard, 7 years old, playing catch with my bigger brother, and he said, "It's all like a girl."
Yeah, the criticisms are harsh,
Yeah.
But let me ask you this on writing: what do you find easier, your journalism articles and material write, or writing? For God's sakes, you wrote a book how to write a resume. For God's sakes, I mean, these how-to books and these fiction books, do they come? Are they different? Are they similar in the ways you do your journalism stories?
Well, in journalism, you have to interview people, Sometimes you don't feel like calling up. Sometimes you don't feel like calling up that person who might not want to hear from you, or you might have to interview somebody who about a subject you don't know a whole heck of a lot about. You might have to do research before you call this person. So, in many ways, doing journalism's harder. Somebody might think that's kind of odd, but gee, you already have facts you can rely on to use for your story. But, like I said, there's that whole other process you have to go through. You have to, interviewing people and making sure your facts are right. So I don't know. I mean, sure, fiction, you can sit down and let it fly, but, you always have that thought in your head that you're not really sure where your story's going to go. You might be fighting some other demons there with the writer's block and so forth. It's hard to say in some ways, but they're two different kinds of processes, you might say.
Hey, I mean, time is catching up with us. Is there any final things you want to say about the book or any of your other books that I touched upon that maybe you want to mention, but I didn't ask a question, so you can mention it?
Well, Pitching for Sanity, of course, just came out this month, and I'm working on a sequel to it. I came to the end of Pitching for Sanity. I thought, well, there's more to tell here, so I'm working on a sequel to Pitching for Sanity that should be out this spring. As this character, Bill Barrister, continues with his wacky friend across America, and their search, you might say, for self-discovery. I don't know. We'll see what other kind of wacky adventures they can find themselves up against.
I have self-discovery just like Bill did in the book. Whenever I go to my kids' little league games or soccer games or bowling, it's amazing how many single moms around my age are there. That's a discovery, all right. Yeah, that's what this guy said. Oh, this guy, man, he's hanging out with this woman, she has teenage boys. It's like, this is something I need, and I'm married 19 years. So, that was my discovery. I'm like, yeah, I kind of like this kind of part of the book, I'll rediscover myself. Hold the line, Mike. I hope you had a good time. We'll bring you back again. When do you think the sequel for Pitching for Sanity will come out?
Oh, I think early spring.
Oh, all right, so it'll be so you know what? We'll get you back on the show. I hope you had a great time. I hope I did everything according, because you were in radio too. But you can criticize me off the air. You can tell me what I did wrong. But hold the line. This is hey, I didn't go to school for journalism or broadcasting. I'm a lawyer. I cross-examine you. Hold the line, Mike. Folks, I had a great time talking to Mike. As you see, he's. I like the fact that Mike delves into different areas, how-to books, fiction, the baseball stuff. Go by Pitching for Sanity. I read it. I think it's a darn good book. I can't wait for the sequel to come out. And this is how I ended, Mike. In the immortal words of Edward R. Murrow, good night, folks. Good luck. We'll see you next time. Just hold the line.